Hey everybody. As you remember, we were talking about banned books week this week, and so I'd like to sort of wrap up with a reading from one of my absolutely favorite banned books, Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. And it is also the beginning of October, which means that it is the beginning of spooky stuff. So at the end, I will have a story from Edgar Allan Poe that's rated 3 S's for a spooky, scary story. Okay. So that's going to be at the very, very end. So I'll read some Shel Silverstein. I'm going to read The Gold Bug if I have time. And then spooky, scary story, The Telltale Heart. All right? Y'all ready for this? Okay, let's get started. Invitation. If you are a dreamer, come in. If you are a dreamer, a wisher, a liar, a hoper, a prayer, a magic bean buyer, if you're a pretender, come sit by my fire, for we have some flax golden tales to spin. Come in, come in. Magic. Sandra's seen a leprechaun. Eddie touched a troll. Laurie danced with witches once. Charlie found some goblins' gold. Donald heard a mermaid sing. Susie spied an elf. But all the magic I have known, I've had to make myself. Hug-a-war. I will not play at tug-a-war. I'd rather play at hug-a-war, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, and where everyone giggles and rolls on the rug, where everyone kisses and everyone grins, and everyone cuddles, and everyone wins. It's dark in here. I am writing these poems from inside a lion, and it's rather dark in here, so please excuse the handwriting, which may not be too clear. But this afternoon, by the lion's cage, I'm afraid I got too near, and I'm writing these lines from inside a lion, and it's rather dark in here. Listen to the mustn'ts. Listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. Smart. My dad gave me $1 bill 'cause I'm his smartest son, and I swapped it for 2 shiny quarters 'cause 2 is more than 1. And then I took the quarters and traded them to Lou for 3 dimes. I guess he don't know that 3 is more than 2. Just then along came old blind Bates, and just 'cause he can't see, he gave me 4 nickels for my 3 dimes, and 4 is more than 3. And I took the nickels to Hiram Coombs down at the seed feed store, and the fool gave me 5 pennies for them, and 5 is more than 4. And then I went and showed my dad, and he got red in his cheeks and closed his eyes and shook his head, too proud of me to speak. True story. This morning, I jumped on my horse and went out for a ride, and some wild outlaws chased me, and they shot me in the side. So I crawled into a wildcat's cave to find a place to hide, but some pirates found me sleeping there, and soon they had me tied to a pole and built a fire under me. I almost cried, till a mermaid came and cut me loose and begged to be my bride. So I said I'd come back Wednesday, but I must admit I lied. Then I ran into a jungle swamp, but I forgot my guide, and I stepped into some quicksand, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't get out until I met a water snake named Clyde, who pulled me to some cannibals who planned to have me fried. But an eagle came and swooped me up, and through the air we flied. But he dropped me in a boiling lake 1,000 miles wide, and you'll never guess what I did then. I died. sick. "I cannot go to school today," said little Peggy Ann McKay. "I have the measles and the mumps, a gash, a rash, and purple bumps. My mouth is wet, my throat is dry. I'm going blind in my right eye. My tonsils are as big as rocks. I've counted 16 chicken pox. There's one more. That's 17. And don't you think my face looks green? My leg is cut. My eyes are blue. It might be instamatic flu. And cough and sneeze and gasp and choke. I'm sure that my left leg is broke. My hip hurts when I move my chin. My belly button's caving in. My back is wrenched. My ankle sprains. My appendix pains each time it rains. My nose is cold. My toes are numb. I have a sliver in my thumb. My neck is stiff, my spine is weak. I hardly whisper when I speak. My tongue is filling up my mouth. I think my hair is falling out. My elbows bent. My spine ain't straight. My temperature is 108. My brain is shrunk. I cannot hear. There is a hole inside my ear. I have a hangnail and my heart is... What? What's that? What's that you say? You say today is Saturday? Goodbye, I'm going out to play. Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. She'd scour the pots and scrape the pans, candy the yams and spice the hams, and though her daddy would scream and shout, she simply would not take the garbage out. So it piled up to the ceilings: coffee grounds, potato peelings, brown bananas, rotten peas, chunks of sour cottage cheese. It filled the can. It covered the floor. It cracked the window and blocked the door with bacon rinds and chicken bones and drippy ends of ice cream cones, prune pits, peach pits, orange peel, gloppy glumps of cold oatmeal, pizza crusts and withered greens, soggy beans and tangerines, crusts of black burned buttered toast, grisly bits of beefy roasts. The garbage rolled on down the hall. It raised the roof. It broke the wall. Greasy napkins, cookie crumbs, globs of gooey bubble gum, cellophane from green bologna, rubbery, blubbery macaroni, peanut butter, caked and dry, curdled milk, crusts of pie, moldy melons, dried up mustard, eggshells mixed with lemon custard, cold French fries, and rancid meat, yellow lumps of cream of wheat. At last, the garbage reached so high that finally it touched the sky, and all the neighbors moved away, and none of her friends would come to play. And finally, Sarah Cynthia Stout said, "Okay, I'll take the garbage out." But then, of course, it was too late. The garbage reached across the state, from New York to the Golden Gate, and there, in garbage she did hate, poor Sarah met an awful fate that I cannot right now relate, because the hour is much too late. But children, remember Sarah Stout, and always take the garbage out. Please do not make fun of me, and please don't laugh. It isn't easy to write a poem on the neck of a running giraffe. The Gold Bug by Edgar Allan Poe. One day I was hiking alone on Sullivan's Island. Sullivan's Island is near the coast of South Carolina. I had just stopped for a rest when I heard someone shouting, "Wolf! Wolf! Wolf!" I could hear an animal crashing through the bushes nearby. I quickly looked for a tree to climb, but there were no trees. And then a huge gray animal landed on my chest. I fell to the ground. I thought that I was going to be killed. Then I heard two men laughing. I was scared and angry at the same time. How could they laugh when I was going to die? Well, I didn't die because the huge gray animal wasn't a wolf at all. It was just a big dog. The dog started to lick my face. The two men were looking down at me, and they were still laughing. One of the men called to the dog, "Get over here, Wolf." Then the man said to me, "I'm sorry about my dog. That's the way he says hello. His name is Wolf. I hope he didn't scare you too much." I got up and brushed off my clothes. "Well," I said, "I was a little scared." The two men smiled and invited me to their hut. But wait a minute. Let me start this story at the beginning. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. In my free time, I like to hunt and fish and hike. Hiking is my favorite thing to do. The land and the water around Charleston are beautiful for hiking. One morning, I crossed over to Sullivan's Island. This island is 3 miles long, but it's not very wide. Someone had told me that no one lived on Sullivan's Island, and so I was surprised to see the two men in their hut, and I was really surprised to see that dog. One of the men was named William LeGrand. The other man's name was Jupiter. Jupiter worked for LeGrand. Jupiter did all the cooking and the cleaning. William LeGrand had once been a very rich man, but now he was poor. He said he wanted to be rich again. But he didn't know how he could get any money. He worried about it, and this worry made him very unhappy. It was good that he had a kind man like Jupiter to take care of him. LeGrand was an artist and a scientist. He loved to study bugs and insects. He showed me his collection of rare insects. I went to see him often, and we talked about many things. In a few short weeks, William LeGrand and I got to be close friends. One cold evening, I crossed over to Sullivan's Island and walked to the hut. I knocked on the door, but no one was at home. I opened the door and went in. There was a fire going in the fireplace. It was cold outside, and I was happy to sit by the fire. After a while, LeGrand and Jupiter came back to the hut. "Well, well, well, look who's here," LeGrand shouted as he took my hand. Then he said to Jupiter, "Make one of your great chicken dinners for the three of us." LeGrand sat down in a chair next to me. He stretched out his legs and held his hands out toward the fire. He said, "We were out hunting for bugs. I have found some good bugs over the years, but the bug that I found yesterday is the best. Let me show it to you." Jupiter was over by the stove, but he could hear us talking. Jupiter said to LeGrand, "You can just forget about that bug. That bug is bad luck." Part 2. The Gold Bug. LeGrand laughed when Jupiter said that the bug was bad luck. He spoke softly so that Jupiter could not hear. He said to me, "I call it the gold bug." "Let's have a look at it," I said to LeGrand. LeGrand opened a small box. He took out the gold bug and handed it to me. The bug felt very heavy. "Are you sure it's dead?" I asked. "It's dead," said LeGrand, "but before it died, it bit me." Just then, Jupiter came into the room. He said, "Yes, sir, that bug bit LeGrand. It sure did. And LeGrand has not been the same ever since." LeGrand laughed. "That's a silly thing to say, Jupiter," he said. I asked Jupiter, "What do you mean LeGrand has not been the same?" Jupiter said, "Ever since that bug bit him, all he thinks about is gold. All he talks about is gold. He thinks that he is going to find some gold. He thinks that he will be a rich man again." "It's possible," said LeGrand with a smile. I looked at the bug in my hand. It really did look like it was made out of gold. Then LeGrand handed me something else. He said, "I found this near the gold bug." At first, I thought it was a piece of paper, but it didn't feel like paper, so I asked him what it was. LeGrand said, "It's a piece of parchment." "Parchment?" I asked. "What's parchment?" LeGrand told me that parchment is made from the skin of a sheep or a goat. When it's all dried out, you can write on it, he said. It's much stronger than paper, so it can last a very long time. I looked down at the parchment. It was blank on both sides. No one had written on it. Just then, Wolf began to bark. Wolf was outside in the cold, and he wanted to come in. Jupiter opened the door, and Wolf ran into the room. He was happy to see me. He liked it when I scratched him behind his ears. Wolf ran over to my seat by the fire, near the fire. I was still holding the piece of parchment in my right hand, so I scratched Wolf behind his ears with my left hand. "Look out," LeGrand said. "Wolf is pushing you into the fire." LeGrand was right. I pulled my right hand away from the fire, and I put the parchment on the table. LeGrand picked up the parchment. He looked at it and started to say something, but then he stopped. He just stood up quickly and put the parchment in a safe place. After dinner, I saw Legrand put the parchment close to the fire again. It looked like he was reading something, but I knew that the parchment was blank. Finally, I said to him, "What are you doing, Legrand? Why is that silly parchment so important to you?" Legrand said, "When the gold bug bit me, I dropped the bug in the sand. I had to get down on my hands and knees to find it. That's when I found the parchment. The gold bug is not that important, but this piece of parchment might be very important." "Why?" I asked. "I can't tell you just yet," he said. "Why not?" I asked. "Because you wouldn't believe me if I told you," Legrand said. And that was all that he said. It was late, and it was time for me to go home. A few days later, I woke up and heard someone pounding on my front door. I jumped out of bed and opened the door. It was Jupiter. He was shouting at me. "I knew it! I knew it!" he yelled. "What's the matter, Jupiter? Tell me what's wrong." Jupiter spoke fast. "Legrand is gone. He's been out all night long, and he still hasn't come back. Wolf is gone too, and so is that gold bug." I patted Jupiter on his back. "Relax, Jupiter," I said. "Maybe Legrand couldn't sleep. Maybe he just took a long walk." "No, sir." "No," said Jupiter. "It's all because of the gold bug. The bite from that bug has made him crazy." I went back to the hut with Jupiter. Legrand was not there. We decided to wait a little while longer before we called for help. "If he isn't back in 1 hour, we will call the police," I said. Part 3. The Map. Jupiter and I had only waited a few minutes before Legrand and Wolf came through the door. Legrand was smiling, but he had a strange look in his eyes. He took off his backpack and put it down. Jupiter was angry. He shouted at Legrand, "Why did you go off by yourself? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you take me with you?" "Everything is okay, Jupiter," Legrand said. "Nothing is okay," Jupiter yelled. "That gold bug has made you a crazy man." Legrand sat down next to me. I said, "Jupiter has good reasons to be mad. He is supposed to take care of you, and then you run off like that." "Jupiter thinks that I'm crazy," Legrand said. "Do you think that I'm crazy?" "Well, I'm starting to think so," I said. Legrand looked at Jupiter and me. He said, "I want to show you both something, but first, we need to build a fire." Jupiter started the fire. I took my chair over to the fireplace. Legrand took something out of his backpack. When the fire was started, Legrand handed me the piece of parchment. "Look at it," he said. "I've already seen it," I said. "There's nothing to look at. It's blank on both sides." "Now, hold it close to the fire," Legrand said, "but don't let it burn." I did what he said to do. Jupiter looked at us and shook his head. He said, "Now both of you are crazy." Legrand kept looking at the parchment. He said to me, "Now take it away from the fire and look at it." I was so surprised I almost fell out of my chair. There was something on the parchment. It looked like some sort of map. I showed it to Jupiter. Jupiter looked at the parchment and said, "Oh no, now I'm going crazy too." "It's like magic," I said to Legrand. "It's a map," he said. "You can only see it for a while, then it fades away. But when you hold the parchment near the fire, the map comes back again." "How is that possible?" I asked. Legrand said, "It's some kind of secret ink that can only be seen when it's near heat." "Who drew the map on the parchment?" I asked. "And why did that person use secret ink?" "Look at the very bottom of the parchment," said Legrand. "There is a small drawing below the map. I think that's a clue." Then Legrand asked us, "What does the drawing look like to you?" "An animal?" I said. "Yes, but what kind of animal?" Legrand asked. Jupiter shouted, "A sheep! A goat!" "Yes, a goat," I said. Legrand looked at us both and asked, "What is another name for a goat?" "What do you call a young goat?" "A kid," I said. "A young goat is called a kid." "That's right," Legrand said. "Have you ever heard the name Captain Kidd?" I jumped up from my chair. "Captain Kidd? The famous pirate?" I remembered the stories about Captain Kidd. He was the most famous of all the pirates. He was caught and hanged in 1701, but before he was caught and hanged, he buried a huge treasure chest somewhere. People looked for the chest, but nobody ever found it. Jupiter picked up the map and looked at it. "This is a confusing map," he said. "I don't know how to read it." "Yes, it is a confusing map," said Legrand, "but I can read it." "That's what I was doing last night. I made a copy of the map, and I followed the map last night." "Do you know where the treasure is buried?" I asked him. "Yes," Legrand asked. "Yes," Legrand said. "At least, I think so." Then he picked up his backpack and said, "Let's go get it." Part 4. The Treasure Hunt. Legrand had a boat ready for us. There were 3 shovels and 3 lanterns in the boat. Wolf barked as we left Sullivan's Island. He was happy that he was going with us. We rowed the boat for about an hour. Then Legrand pointed to a small beach and said, "That's where we stop. That's where we leave the boat." We left the boat on the beach and walked for another hour. I carried one of the shovels, and Jupiter carried the other 2. As we walked, Legrand said, "Jupiter, can you still climb a tree?" "I am still the best tree climber there is," Jupiter said. Legrand stopped walking. He took out his map and looked at it by the light of his lantern. He pointed to a tall, old tree. He asked Jupiter, "Can you climb that tree?" "How high up in that tree do I have to go?" asked Jupiter. Legrand looked at the map and said, "The 7th branch. Can you climb up to the 7th branch?" "Sure," Jupiter said, "but why did we bring shovels if we were only going to climb trees?" Legrand laughed again. "You just climb, and take this with you." Legrand handed Jupiter a long string. The gold bug was tied to one end of the string. "That bug sure does give me the creeps," said Jupiter. Legrand just laughed. Jupiter took the string, but he was careful not to touch the bug. Then he started to climb the tree. There was just enough moonlight to see Jupiter climb from branch to branch. When Jupiter got up to the 7th branch, he called down, "Okay, I'm here. What now?" Legrand called up, "Now crawl out on the branch, and Jupiter, don't be afraid, no matter what you see." Jupiter called down, "What am I going to see?" Just then he yelled out, "Oh, my Lord, there's a skull up here. I'm up here in a tree with a dead man's head." Legrand laughed. He called up to Jupiter, "Don't you worry about the skull of that dead man. He's been dead for over 100 years. Now listen, Jupiter. Put the gold bug through the eye hole of that skull. The left eye hole, not the right eye hole. Then lower the bug on the string all the way down here and don't let go of your end of the string." Jupiter called down to us, "Why do I have to do this?" Legrand called up, "Do you want to be a rich man?" Jupiter called down, Okay, I'm doing it. I am putting the dead bug through the dead man's eye hole, but it's not a very good way to get rich." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I just looked at Legrand. I must have had a funny look on my face because Legrand laughed. He said to me, "We dig at the spot where the gold bug hits the ground. That's where Captain Kidd's treasure chest is buried." "So tell me," I said, "what does the gold bug have to do with it?" "The gold bug has nothing to do with it at all," Legrand answered. "We had to tie something to the end of the string, but it didn't have to be the gold bug. We could have used a nail or a rock. I just thought that the gold bug would be lucky." Little by little, the gold bug came down out of the tree. When it hit the ground, Legrand called up to Jupiter. "You can let go of the string now and come down from the tree," he said. "We need to start digging." We picked up the shovels, and the 3 of us began to dig. After about an hour, the shovels hit something that was made out of wood. Wolf barked and jumped down into the hole. He started to dig at the ground with his feet. "Wolf!" shouted Legrand. "Get out of there!" The dog jumped out of the hole but kept on barking. We all held up our lanterns and looked down. We saw human skeletons in the hole. Jupiter let out a little cry. "Who were these people?" I asked. "They were the pirates who buried Captain Kidd's treasure," said Legrand. "Captain Kidd killed them so that no one else would know about the treasure chest." Legrand jumped into the hole and pushed the bones off to the side. Now he was standing on a wooden chest that was 3 feet wide and 3 feet long. "Captain Kidd's treasure chest!" screamed Legrand. We opened the huge chest. It was full of jewels and gold coins from Spain and France and Germany, and there were gold rings and gold watches and gold bowls, too. We thought that it must be worth more than $1 million. The three of us were suddenly very rich. Legrand started laughing and shouting. "You can thank the gold bug for this," he yelled. So that's the story of the gold bug. It took us 2 trips in the boat to get all of the treasure home. And if you want to know how much treasure we found, I'm sorry, but I can't tell you. I can't tell you because we're still counting it all. The end. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just as at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily Steadily, I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and did nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, though I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with those suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it, you cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the wretched spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. he was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. Then I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha! Ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent, in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at a length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grow very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound. Much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath. And yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no! No, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear these hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark! Louder! Louder! Louder and louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing from my favorite banned book, and I hope you enjoyed listening to a couple of Edgar Allan Poe spooky stories to get you in the Halloween mood. Um, I cannot wait to continue on this reading journey with you guys, and happy October!